Hey friends, welcome back. So today I'm going to be reviewing the Faction Plastic V1 skates based on my experience. In today's video, I'm going to go over the various components of the skate, talk about the things that I liked, the things that I didn't like or maybe didn't prefer, talk about my final thoughts, and then let you know who I think this skate is best for. So let's go over an overview of the skate first. So this is a fairly new boot that was released in summer of 2025. It comes in a boot only setup with liners for around 250 US dollars. Price probably varies a little bit, depends on where you are and when you buy them. They are designed with the sole plate, the boot, the liner, all of that is Faction. It comes with the Stealth sole plate, which has been updated from the previous version that came originally on the white and blue carbon factions. And the shell sizing is similar to the carbons, where it's a single shell size, and then they have a middle shell break liner split. That's the half size. I really don't know what the difference between the liners are, so I can't really talk about that today. All I can do is talk about the how these fit and worked for my foot in relation to the shell size. And I pre-ordered these and they came in, and I've been skating them off and on for about 5 months. I'll get into detail on why it was off and on. And so for reference, this is the size 10 shell. I am a Mondo 275, so that fits the 9.5 liner, and that falls about midway through the shell break. And I'll give you my thoughts on the sizing as well. Let's move on to the things that I like about the Stealth sole plate. So to point out, the sole plate is mounted to hardware on the inside of the shell using 8 mounting points, and then the frames bolt to the hardware as well that penetrates through the shell. And overall, I noticed that the sole plate and the frame mounting was very solid and exhibited very minimal flex, if any flex. The sole plates are made from like a harder material, so they don't wear down very quickly, so that means they're very durable, and because it is harder, it also means that they slide very fast on grinding. I was a fan of the updated H block. Before, it was set back a little bit and it had that kind of classic check mark on it. But I mean, I rode these with Create Original frames, and it lined up perfectly, and it was just very solid, no slipping out. So very, very well designed sole plate. It was an appropriate width for doing sole tricks on ledges, so you didn't have to bone over as much. Well, let me back up. So it's an appropriate width where it's easier to bone over on ledges to hold sole grinds. Once that sole plate gets like really, really wide, it's harder to like fold over, and so you find yourself kind of like pulling off the ledge. I thought this was the perfect width just for how I skate. And when I skated these on various ledges, rails, coping. Didn't notice really any sticking. Always have to wax stuff just a little bit, but overall they slid really well. And the sole plates, I didn't take them off, so you can't really see it, but there's like this little foam pad between the bottom of the boot and the top of the sole plate that just helps kind of dampen sound, and it also provides a little shock absorption. So that is that just helps with creating a great audible noise when you land, as well as just like I said, creating a little bit of shock absorption. All right, let's talk about the things I didn't like about the sole plates. Honestly, there was nothing. I absolutely love the sole plates, and the only thing that I contested on the original was just that the sole plate was set back a little, so it took some additional time to like work in a groove on the backslide. But this one, major improvement, so I have no complaints. So this is the stock liner, and let's go ahead and talk about the things that I liked about the liner. So overall, I found that it was a super comfortable liner. It's like, soft and kind of plushy. It's not the firmest liner, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. It is nice and wide, so it fits the profile of a foot relatively well. And for reference, I said my foot is 275 millimeters long, but it's also about 100 millimeters wide, and that is basically at the toes of my feet, about to the midway of my arch, is 100 millimeters, and I didn't feel any pressure points in these liners. It does have this nice padding on the top too, so that helps kind of protect your toes if you have really bulky toes. And I like this concept of having this back wrap with the three uh, laces, lace eyelets, because that allows you to kind of cinch in around the top of the foot. And I'll talk about fit here in a little bit too. So these are not, overly puffy, but, you can definitely like squeeze it and feel, some plush in there. And honestly, like the plushiness kind of gives me that feeling of the Nomad liners. I would say that these are, uh, what's, I don't, I don't know that there's any other liners on the market that I've skated that feel like these, but I'd say that they have a lot of similarities probably to the Nomad liner, just how they feel, but they're definitely softer than the Nomad liners from a supportive perspective. And then, these are a decent quality too. I'll talk some more about that. But, I was only able to skate these about 8 to 10 sessions in the skates. So I'll dive into that when I talk about the shell. And all right, so let's go over the things that I maybe didn't like and didn't prefer. So the first one is, within my first 8 sessions, I would say the first session in these, the materials were nice and stiff, everything was plush, so it filled out the shell really nicely. And, I had a good first session, but then it was like as soon as I started skating the mini pipe, I think that's when the liner started like, breaking in, and that's kind of where my problem started. So I found that within 8 sessions this liner had packed in pretty substantially, and it just opened up more volume within the skate because it allowed my foot to move around inside the liner, which then kind of floated around inside the shell. I started getting really crazy heel lift. And then, like I said too, is, after a few sessions, once the materials start breaking in, you really find out that there's not a lot of support in uh, these liners. And, that just causes like a loss of responsiveness for me. I don't know what it is because, you feel the cuff and, you can feel that it's not the most responsive, but and I think that has to do, the difference is with the way that this shapes versus like a soft top carbon, because, soft top carbon, you're able to like pull in the fabric a lot more. So you can, basically like dial it in a lot more. But with these, there's just something about them that in my opinion, I don't think they paired nicely together. Um, so, with that being said, I did notice that there were some inconsistencies with the stitching, and I had some bent eyelets, which honestly, it wasn't like a deal breaker. It is a more economical skate, and this is kind of their first run at liners for a plastic boot. And it is still more on the more affordable option. And let's see what else. One thing about the insoles too, or one thing about the insoles is, so the skate is really, really comfortable, but you can see that, this is the insole that comes with it. And just after skating it for, a few sessions, it's made of like foam. And it's the type of foam where as you continue to like land in it over time, it just compresses more and more and more. And so within 8 sessions, I've compressed almost all the heel, and you can see all the stress lines within the insole from just skating it. And so it's a okay shock absorber, but it's not one that is going to last a long time, in my opinion, especially if you're a bigger person and you're taking a lot of drops and landings. That's just kind of my experience with it. So, I mentioned that, yeah, and the one thing too is the skate has a decent shock absorber, which I'll talk about when I talk about the shell. And then you combine it with the amount of heel lift that is in the liner. It was causing me a lot of like really forward lean. And so as the shock absorber in this broke in and the liners were breaking in, it felt like my foot was like cramming into the toe of the skate more, and I was getting like really bad like pinching on the pinky toe, very similar to like if you've skated the Rems HR 2.5s. It was called that Rem 6 toe, where it was just like pinching. And so I wasn't able to skate these liners even though they're really comfy. And I honestly tried almost every single liner out there. I tried, Intuition Prime. I tried the Intuition 909 liners. I tried the MyFit Primes, MyFit Second Skins, Rollerblade Blank, the MyFit Recall liners, the Rollerblade Nomad liners, and the honestly, and then the crown liners too. And I thought the crown liners fit the heel ankle portion of the skate the best, but it just had way too much padding in, so it was cramming my toes. So ultimately I couldn't find a liner that worked for these, that locked in my heel and then allowed enough room in the toe box. So I at the yeah, it was just I couldn't replicate how that feeling was in the first session with the stock setup. And you know yeah, so sorry, I'm just thinking through my thoughts. But yeah, I couldn't replicate how they felt out of the box, which was amazing. But it's just as time progressed, I just couldn't find a liner that fit the skate the best, that worked for my foot shape. Another thing about the liner, I don't have them here, but they come with these elastic bungees. Honestly, I hate those things. I tried them on the standard Omnis, I tried them on the Faction Carbons, and really they broke on me after a couple sessions. But I just don't feel like it uh, laces up the way I want to lace up, and it doesn't really do anything to help keep me from getting heel lift. So let's talk about the things that I liked about the shell. Honestly, I love the look of these things. They have this look that kind of reminds me of Solomon's, but it's its own unique looking skate. Love the colorway with the kind of like tannish sole plates and the gold cuff bolts, tan buckle. It's just a well thought out, designed looking skate. It does come with padding on the cuff bolts, and you can see that I added a ton of padding inside the cuff, and I'll talk about that too. They are really wide in the heel, so if you've got a really like wide heel ankle area, this would be really good for you. And like I said, out of the box, it was really comfortable with the stock liner. Originally, I liked the flex on these. I'll talk more about that. It does have, a little bit taller of a toe box compared to some other skates, so that's nice too. And then, it has this bridge hardware. Hold on, let me take this insole out. Yeah, there we go. So it has this, well, I can't even. There we go. All right. So it has this metal bridging hardware, and it's very similar to like what more skate companies are starting to do, like Echo Standard, is they're putting plates on the inside of the boot. You mount the sole plates and the frames directly to it, and then it just kind of sandwiches and squeezes everything together, and it's supposed to make it a lot stiffer and a lot more of like a composite setup where everything is working together to give you the most responsive ride. And I found that it was a very responsive ride, basically from sole plate down. I'll talk more about that. And I did notice frames tend to loosen a little more than other hardware, but I didn't notice any cuff bolts loosening. Sole plates, those stayed in place really well. It was just the frames I'd have to adjust after every session or tighten after every session. It is a really, really wide and like flexy cuff. But then, one thing I noticed too is like as you ratchet it down more, it takes a lot more effort to like get that flex out of the skate. So, but it's also kind of a weird cuff shape too. It's more of like a oblong oval than it is a circle, like a lot of cuffs. So that I thought that was kind of a interesting design feature. And then it does come with hole. It's not really holes drilled into it. It has depressions in the shell so you know where to drill if you want to add a 45 strap. So, I tried that out and I thought it was really easy. I just, picked out drill bits that fit the hole size, drilled it in, put in the hardware, and, that was a really easy setup. Shock absorber, it's made from similar material as the insole, so it's a foam, and honestly, because it was thicker, it provided a lot of really good shock absorption. I'll talk about this more here in a couple minutes. And then I was really hoping that these would fit and skate like the carbons, but unfortunately that was not the case for me. So yeah, let's talk about the things that I maybe didn't like or weren't my preference about the shell. So first off, was the shock absorber, and because this is foam, I kind of knew that it was going to pack in relatively quickly, just based on my experience with skating similar products. And sure enough, within a month and a half, the heel had completely catered in, and as you can see, it just doesn't rebound back to its original position anymore. So what that means is you just end up with less material there that can actually absorb shock. The good thing is if you're looking for a replacement, the new standard Omni shock absorber fits the shell really nicely. They are just a little longer, so it kind of gives you a more it spreads out the drop over the length of your foot a little more. So depending on what your foot shape is, that may or may not work for you. But at least in the heel area, it's pretty, it fits the shell pretty nicely. One thing that I wanted to mention with the bridge hardware is, so the bridge hardware recesses down under the plastic a little bit, but when you're like putting your foot and you're putting all your weight like inside the skates, you tend to kind of fill those crevices. And as the stock insole and shock absorber started wearing in, I did start feeling more shock within my knees as they kind of broke in. So that was another reason that I needed to try, something different with insoles and liners. One thing about these two is the shell is about 8 millimeters longer internally than the carbon skate, but it's also narrower in the toe box. So, that's the thing with carbon is like, if you get a pressure point, you can heat mold the carbon, press it out, and then it's good. With these, I tried heat molding it. Not heat molding, but using a heat gun and just kind of pressing out. And I couldn't get the toe to like budge because it's really thick plastic here on the sides. So I just wasn't able to like press that out at all because I was hoping that, if I got a liner that fit well enough, press out, a couple pressure areas and it'd be good. I couldn't get it to work. So, with the heel too, so if you look, it's basically a straight tube, maybe is the best way to say it. So, when they put a liner in there, there's nothing like holding that liner like really in place, which, oh, here it is, which is why I think Faction added a lot of this rubber here on the back and on the heel. But I don't think that rubber was honestly that effective for preventing heel lift in my experience. So again, because this heel was so padded, I tried adding in padding, trying to fill some of the volume in there, but I just kept getting liners that were just like picking up and, moving around inside the ankle area. And because like the eyelet stops short, so it stops kind of like right on top of the ankle, I feel like it could have used one more eyelet to like really cinch around the foot. But I even tried, different lacing techniques, and I just couldn't get anything to work to keep my foot like locked inside the skate and then using a liner that didn't cause pressure points on my toes. I don't know. It's wild. And, so I think the cuff, it's really, it's decently wide, but it is super, super long. So like, let me show you this. So this is, like how I was writing it in the clips that I took for this video. And by the way, like in those clips, what happened is like I had to basically stop skating the Factions because I was getting so much knee pain from just skating around in them. And I think it was due to all the flex and heel lift and not being able to like get support for my foot, because I need a certain amount of support. And, I think I was just like slopping all over the place and it just was causing me a lot of knee pain. And the funny thing is like, I would skate these for one day and it'd be like a crazy knee pain. And then I would put on a different pair of skates the next day and I'd have no issues. And then I'd put these back on and then it would be like crazy knee pain. So it was something about how, these, they're putting some sort of pressure on my knee that, or they were, I don't know, maybe it was my body trying to respond a certain way to the flex that it was putting a lot of pressure on my knee. But I basically took 6 weeks off of skating these and, I went to Carriers Open, and you probably saw that I put out a video on that, came back, put these on, and it was just like the worst knee pain. Then the next day I went out and skated my Icons and it was fine. And then I went out and I filmed the clips for this, which were just absolutely excruciating pain in my knee. And then the next day I went out and I skated my Broscows and I didn't have any issues. So it was just something about these, and it's not that it's like, it's probably related to like a lingering knee issue, but it was birds. But yeah, it's just whatever about these, it just brought out that knee pain to an excruciating level that other skates I have aren't doing. So anyway, that was the reason I had to take a break from these, and ultimately because I couldn't get a liner to work for him and couldn't get him to like fit my foot, I'm not going to be able to skate him anymore. But oh yeah, so here's the standard Omni shock absorber, so you can kind of see side by side comparison. So this one's about half an inch longer, and they're about the same thickness. Omni's a little taller, but once you factor in the insole, the faction ends up being taller. Another thing with the skate, so I added the 45 strap. 45 strap really didn't do anything for me, and it's because the plastic comes up higher than the top of the liner too, so it just doesn't fold over and suck that foot down. And let's see what else. So yeah, so like I said, in my videos, you can see how these birds are super annoying, by the way. You can see how sloppy and painful my skating looks, and that's because that's how I felt out there. Like, I wasn't responsive, I was struggling, it hurt to jump, it hurt to land, but I wanted to at least show you guys how my skating looked in these, and I could barely even do a lot of my safety tricks. And honestly, after I fell after that top acid on the coping, I was just like, okay, I'm done with this. So whatever clips there are, that's it. That's the clips. But like I said, I couldn't get it to fit right. It was not the most responsive, and honestly, skating transition was probably the worst for me. And what it is like when I would skate taller quarter pipes, I would drop in or I would come up and I could feel my feet like buckling due to, the flex and lifting. And I would like get thrown into the coping at weird angles, just because it's like it would, my body weight would get thrown off, just due to movement of my foot that I wasn't prepared for. And that's not something that I really enjoyed. So, that's kind of my thought on the skates. Like, I'm not trying to knock faction. I think what they're doing is good. I think this is just a scenario where it's a skate that doesn't fit the shape of my foot, and that's kind of what it is. Like, I'm not gonna knock them. I respect what they're doing. I'm glad that they're pushing the sport and trying something new and different. So, what are my final thoughts on these skates? Honestly, I think it is a pretty affordable boot option. I'm glad I tried it, but ultimately it was not for me just because I couldn't get them dialed in or to fit. I really love the carbon skates, but I just could not get these dialed in. And I think that they were a good grinder blading. Oh, excuse me, a good grinder blading skate where you just roll up to something, jump on it, jump off. It's going to be a perfect skate for that. you know, it wasn't good for me because I like mixing grinding with skating transition. It's just the way that I've always loved to skate. And I can't really have a skate that's only good for half of what I like to do in a session. So, and then, there were some minor quality issues with the liner and, didn't really have any with the shell. But again, it's the first liner. It didn't really affect the performance on it. So, not knocking it, you can definitely tell there's little quality issues with the shock absorber and the insole. But again, I think the intent is that they're trying to make this a more price point skate. So when you make it a more price point skate, you're going to have to make some sacrifices in order to get it into a budget somewhere. It's just my take on that is, okay, if you are trying to get it into a certain price point, because this liner is really the only one that fits the shell, I think that liner needs to be a lot higher quality and not break in as much, because once that initial fit is gone, I could not replicate it. just my thoughts. And, I think the sizing is a little bit of a gamble on this because it is longer, but it's also narrower at the toes. So it's like, could you theoretically downsize? Possibly, but then you're going to have to fight cram toes. And there's honestly not really a good way to fix that because of how big the heel area is. So if you use a thinner liner, you're going to end up possibly getting a lot more heel lift. I don't know. I think it's going to be a gamble, and honestly, like, it's hard for me to make a recommendation on what to do for sizing. Like, I tend to say I'd rather have it a little longer than not pinch my toes. But then the other part of me is like, well, if you do that, then you're get crazy foot lift, and then you can't dial in the skates, and then it just feels sloppy and not responsive. Definitely a catch-22 situation. So I think this is the first time that I can't make a recommendation on sizing because it could be a gamble either way. And, I want to reemphasize that I really love what Faction is doing for the industry. They're putting out skates, they have a team of riders, they're giving pro skates, they send the riders to all these different contests around the U.S., and they're trying something new and different. And I think that's what our industry needs is some innovation. So, props to them on doing what they're doing. And, one thing I would note too is like if you buy these, I would just go in with the expectation that you're going to have to do some tweaking from the start in order to try and get it dialed in. And there's a chance that they may not work for you. And I know people who have these and they work perfectly for them. And I know others who are going through the same struggles that I have. So I wish I had a better recommendation on how to get these to work. But after trying everything, I don't. So I think you just have to have a foot shape that fits the skate the best. Okay, so let's talk about who this skate is best for. Honestly, this is best for someone who is looking for a flexi skate, who's not worried about, having the best fit, support, or responsiveness. And you're looking for something with a large heel, narrower toe box, but still a tall toe box. And then really someone who is, into grinder blading. So if you don't care about transition, you're just going to like roll along something, jump up to something, jump off, and you're not into doing ramps and quarter pipes and all that stuff, this is honestly going to be a really good skate for you. So who is this skate not for? Honestly, this is not going to be a good skate if you are needing more stiffness and responsiveness out of a skate. It's also not going to be a skate for someone who has like a low volume, flat foot or really wide toe box. And then, I don't know that this is going to be the best skate for someone who likes to skate a lot of ramps and transition just due to how flexy the skate is and how much movement there was for me in the heel. And that's just based on my experience. All right, well, that wraps up today's review. Like always, thank you all for checking in. If you got any questions, comments, feel free to drop me a line. I'll do my best to get back to you and try and be helpful and respond to it. Again, thank you all for watching. We'll catch you next time.